September 9th, 1904. A dirt road outside Chicago, Illinois. The sun has barely cleared the tree line, and already the air smells like engine oil and burning rubber. 200,000 people have lined both sides of that road, shoulder to shoulder, stretching so far back into the field that the ones in the rear can barely hear what's happening at the front. They came from 4 states. They walked miles to get here. And what they are waiting for is a race between machines that most of them have never seen run in person. The 2 favorites are already warming up at the line. One of them is riding Indian. The other one is on something newer, something that nobody in this crowd knows quite what to make of yet. It is painted black. It sounds different from anything else at that starting line. Rougher, deeper, like something alive is trapped inside the engine and cannot get out. The rider on that black machine is a 23-year-old from Milwaukee named Walter Davidson. He is about to do something that will echo for 120 years. But here is what I want you to hold on to before I tell you the rest of this story. That sound coming out of Walter Davidson's engine in September of 1904, that specific, loping, irregular throb that made the people standing closest to it step back half a step without quite knowing why, was not designed. It was not planned. Nobody at Harley-Davidson sat in a room and engineered that sound on purpose. It was an accident, a side effect of a mathematical angle, a mistake that turned into a trademark. And when the lawyers finally tried to protect it, to put a legal fence around that sound so no other company could copy it, the court cases went on for years. Because you cannot trademark something you didn't mean to create. And yet that accidental sound is one of the most recognized sounds on Earth today. I'm going to tell you how a $50 engine built in a wooden shed behind a house became the most iconic motorcycle in human history. I'm going to tell you about the war Harley almost lost, the sound that saved them, the soldiers who came home and changed everything, and the single worst business decision anyone ever made that nearly destroyed 100 years of work in 1 decade. I promised you the real story, not the version on the museum wall, not the version printed on the t-shirts, the one they don't talk about. Stay with me, because the part that changes how you think about all of it comes at the end, and I mean that. Let's go back 3 years before that race, back to where the whole thing started. It is the winter of 1900, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The city smells like iron foundries and river water. The streets are mostly dirt, the ones outside downtown, rutted deep by wagon wheels and packed hard by frost. There is no motorcycle industry in America. There is no motorcycle anything in America. The word itself barely exists yet in the way we use it now. What exists is the bicycle, which had its great boom in the 1890s and is already beginning to feel ordinary, and the automobile, which is real but costs more than most working men make in a year and breaks down constantly in ways that require a trained mechanic to fix. And in a house on Highland Boulevard, a 20-year-old draftsman named William Harley is spending his evenings drawing an engine on brown paper bags. He is not trying to build an empire. He does not have that kind of ambition, not yet. He has a specific, small, embarrassingly practical problem. He wants to stop pedaling his bicycle up hills. That is the entire scope of the dream in 1900. He wants a motor, cheap enough to build, small enough to fit on a bicycle frame, strong enough to move a man without him having to push. His childhood friend Arthur Davidson lives nearby. Arthur is not an engineer. Arthur is not technical in any meaningful way. But Arthur has something William does not. Arthur can look at an unfinished idea and see not what it is, but what it could become. He looks at William's drawings, and he does not see a motorized bicycle. He sees a business. And he says so. And William, the quiet one, the careful one, the one who measures twice and cuts once, listens to him. They start building in the shed behind the Davidson family home. A wooden structure barely big enough for 2 men and a workbench. They borrow a lathe from a friend. They buy steel with money saved from paychecks. They work in the evenings after their regular jobs, and on weekends and in the early mornings before the city is fully awake. The first engine is finished in 1901. It is, by every honest measure, a disappointment. One cylinder, 116 cubic centimeters. 2 horsepower on a very good day. The leather belt that connects it to the rear wheel slips when it rains, which in Wisconsin is often. The whole machine weighs enough that on any hill with a real grade, the motor gives up and the rider has to get off and pedal alongside it to reach the top. William Harley rides it up a Milwaukee hill in the autumn of 1901 and has to pedal the whole way. He arrives at the top red-faced, not from exertion, from humiliation. He turns the machine around, rolls it back to the shed, and starts drawing again. That moment, that specific moment of a young man pushing a machine up a hill that the machine was supposed to climb on its own. That is the real beginning of Harley-Davidson. Not the logo, not the factory, not the legend. That hill, that failure, that refusal to accept that this was as good as it was going to get. He went back to the shed, and he stayed there. By 1903, the second engine was done. 25 cubic inches. Better carburetor. A frame they built themselves from steel tubing, looped at the front in a shape that would become a Harley-Davidson signature for the next century. The leather belt had been rebuilt, heavier, tighter. The whole machine was heavier. It was also, for the first time, actually good enough to do the thing it was supposed to do. They built 3 motorcycles in 1903, 3 complete machines, by hand, in a wooden shed in Milwaukee. They sold all 3 before they finished building them. Word spread the way word spreads in a city of that size in that era, face to face, across backyard fences, at church. 2 boys on Highland Boulevard are building something that actually works. People showed up to see it. People offered money before it was finished. One of those 3 machines, serial number 1, the very first Harley-Davidson ever sold, was found decades later by a man who had bought it without knowing what it was. He used it to chase cows on his farm. When it was recovered and examined, it had over 100,000 miles on it. 100,000 miles on an engine built by hand in 1903 in a wooden shed. It was still running. That is not a legend. That is a fact. And it tells you more about William Harley than any biography ever written about him. He built the first one to last because he had no other way to build. Cutting corners was not in his vocabulary. Doing it fast at the expense of doing it right was not something he was capable of. In 1904, Arthur Davidson's father, a Scottish immigrant carpenter who had come to America with nothing but his tools and his willingness to work, built them a real structure. 10 feet wide, 15 feet long, not big, smaller than most people's garages today. On the door, Arthur painted the name by hand, Harley-Davidson Motor Company. The door faced a dirt alley, and now I need you to stop for a moment and hold 2 images in your mind at the same time. That door on that dirt alley in 1904. And the Harley-Davidson Museum in Milwaukee today, 4 floors of glass and steel, with the original engine in a climate-controlled case lit from below, visited by hundreds of thousands of people a year, with a gift shop that sells more merchandise than some countries export. Hold both of those images and understand that the line between them runs directly through a $50 engine and a hill that almost broke a young man's confidence and didn't. Now, September 9th, 1904, Chicago. That race I told you about, Walter Davidson, Arthur's brother, is at the starting line on a machine his brother and William Harley built. He is not the most famous rider at that race. He is not the favorite. Indian motorcycle is already established, already winning, already the name that people know when they talk about motorcycle racing in America. Indian has money. Indian has racing infrastructure. Indian has a track record. What Walter Davidson has is the machine. The race is 200 miles on dirt roads through the Illinois farmland, not a controlled circuit. Real roads. The kind of roads that punish a machine for every compromise its builders made in the name of cost or speed or convenience. Every loose bolt, every weak weld, every belt that isn't quite right gets found by 200 miles of dirt road and 45-degree heat. Walter Davidson finishes the race. He finishes it clean, with no mechanical stops, no repairs on the road, no moments where he had to get off and figure out what broke. He crosses the line and his score, under the endurance scoring system of that era, is perfect. 1,000 out of 1,000. Nobody else who finished that race matched it. Harley-Davidson won its first major competition not with a faster engine, not with a more powerful machine, with a machine that simply did not break. While other riders were stopped at the side of dirt roads in Illinois trying to figure out what had gone wrong, Walter Davidson kept moving. The name that nobody had quite known before September 9, 1904, was in the newspapers by September 10th. And the orders that came into the shed on Highland Boulevard that autumn were more than 2 men working evenings and weekends could fill. They hired help. They expanded. They moved into a real factory building in 1906. And in 1907 they incorporated 4 men splitting the company equally among themselves. William Harley, Arthur Davidson, Arthur's brother Walter, who had just won that race, and their oldest brother William Davidson, who had the steadiest hands of any machinist any of them had ever seen. 4 men, equal shares, no single person with the power to make a final call over the objections of the other 3. That decision, that specific governance structure they put in place in 1907, is one of the things that saved the company 50 years later when everything around it was collapsing. I will come back to that. But first you need to understand what happened next, because what happened next almost ended everything before it had really started. It is 1910. There are now over 150 motorcycle manufacturers operating in the United States. 150. Some of them are real companies with engineering talent and capital and genuine ambition. Most of them are names on a brochure selling a machine that will fall apart within a season. The market is chaotic, oversaturated, and brutal. Companies that exist in January often do not exist in December. The ones that survive 1 year are not guaranteed to survive 2. And the dominant name in all of it is not Harley-Davidson. It is Indian. Indian Motorcycle, based in Springfield, Massachusetts, founded the same year William Harley finished his first engine, is by 1910 the superior machine by nearly every measurement that matters to the people buying motorcycles. Their engines produce more power. Their racing record is better. Their designs incorporate new engineering faster. And they have something intangible but real, a kind of prestige that comes from being associated with winning, from having their name on the front page of the sporting papers after every major race. Harley-Davidson is the reliable one, the one the police departments are buying, the one the working man chooses because it starts every morning without drama and doesn't require a trained specialist to keep it running. In the conversations that serious riders are having, Indian is the first name out of their mouths. Harley is the other one. This is the moment in the story where a different company, a company run by a man with less patience or more fear, makes a desperate move, tries to outrace Indian on Indian's terms, throws its engineering resources at producing a faster machine for the track at the expense of the things that made it trustworthy off it. William Harley does not do that. He does something quieter. He has been thinking about an engine configuration for years, not because of racing, not because of competition, because the physics of it interest him, because he has been drawing it in margins and on spare paper and in his head, refining it until he understands it completely. In 1911, he introduces it. 2 cylinders. A 45-degree V arrangement. Sharing a single crankpin in a way that means both cylinders cannot fire at equal intervals. The physics of the angle make that impossible. What that unequal firing interval produces is a sound. I need you to understand what kind of sound this is. It is not a smooth hum. It is not the crisp, even note of an engine firing at regular intervals. It is a lope, a throb, an irregular beat that carries further than any engine sound has a mechanical right to carry. You can hear a Harley V twin from 2 blocks away before you can see the machine. You know what it is before you see it. The sound announces itself. And William Harley did not design that sound. He designed an angle, 45 degrees. The sound was a consequence of the mathematics, a byproduct of the geometry, an accident. Nobody at Harley-Davidson sat in a room and said, "Let's make it sound like this." What they said was, 45 degrees is the right angle for this engine configuration, and that angle happened to produce a voice that no other engine in the world has ever matched. Arthur Davidson heard that V-twin fire up for the first time, and he did not think about how to smooth it out. He thought about how to make sure they never changed it. He was right. By 1913, the V-twin is standard. By 1915, it is the sound of the streets of American cities, rolling through neighborhoods before dawn, announcing a Harley the way a church bell announces the hour. People know it without being told what it is. And a machine that people recognize by sound alone before they can see it is not just a product anymore. It is a presence. Now here is the part of this story that almost nobody talks about. The part that changed the direction of the company so fundamentally that without it, everything I've told you so far might have meant nothing. And it has nothing to do with engineering. It is the summer of 1917. America has been in the First World War for 3 months. The United States Army needs transportation. Specifically, it needs motorcycles. Reliable ones. Ones that can handle mud and shell-damaged roads, and the kind of sustained punishment that would destroy a machine built with any compromise in its construction. The Army reaches out to the motorcycle manufacturers. Harley-Davidson gets the larger contract. Over the next year and a half, Harley-Davidson builds more than 20,000 motorcycles for the United States military. 20,000. For a company that had built 3 motorcycles in its very first year of production, that number is not just a contract, it is a transformation. New machinery, new processes, new workers trained to build to a standard that has no room for variation, because in a war zone, a machine that fails is not an inconvenience. It is a death. Those 20,000 motorcycles go to France. American soldiers ride them through the mud and the rain and the shelling. They hold together under conditions that expose every weakness in every machine that has one. When the war ends and the soldiers come home, the motorcycle they remember, the one that did not fail them, is the Harley-Davidson. They buy them for their own use. They tell their brothers and their fathers and their friends. They become the walking advertisement for a machine that proved itself in the harshest possible conditions, in the only test that really cannot be argued with. By 1920, Harley-Davidson is the largest motorcycle manufacturer in the world, with machines in 67 countries. Indian is still there. Indian is still competitive. But the gap between them is no longer just about which machine wins on Sunday. It is about which machine the United States Army trusted when lives were on the line. And that is not a gap you close by winning a race. But I told you there was a part of this story that changes how you think about all of it. I told you it was coming. This is the part. Here is what happened to the 150 motorcycle manufacturers that existed in 1910. By 1930, nearly all of them are gone. The Great Depression arrives in 1929 and kills most of what survived the previous 2 decades of fierce competition. Companies that had real customers and real engineering and real loyalty, companies that deserved to survive by any fair measure, find themselves unable to get through a single year of collapsing orders and called loans. The doors close. The names disappear from the magazines. The machines are sold for parts. Harley-Davidson survives. Barely. In the worst years of the 1930s, the company produces fewer than 4,000 motorcycles in a year. The founding families take salary cuts to keep the workers employed. There are months when the decision of whether the company continues is genuinely not certain. The men running it are making that decision week by week. They hold on. And then, in 1953, something happens that should have been impossible to believe, except that by 1953 everyone who had been paying attention saw it coming for years. Indian Motorcycle closes its doors. The company that had beaten Harley-Davidson in the early races, the brand that had been the prestige name when Harley was just the reliable one, the machine that had won the hearts of the serious riders when all Harley could claim was that the police bought it. Indian Motorcycle, founded in 1901, ceased production in 1953. Gone. Harley-Davidson is now the only American motorcycle manufacturer left standing. Not because they were always the fastest, not because their engineering was always ahead. They are the last ones standing because of what they refused to do. They refused to chase racing glory at the expense of the machine the working man trusted. They refused to change the sound when engineers suggested smoothing it out. They refused to let a single person make all the decisions, because four men arguing in a room make fewer catastrophic mistakes than one man who is certain he is right. And here is the thing that those founders never got to see. William Harley died in 1943. He never saw Indian clothes. Arthur Davidson died in 1950. He never saw his company become the last one standing. Walter Davidson, who won that race in 1904 with a perfect score on a machine nobody knew yet, died in 1942. They built something that outlasted them. They built something that absorbed 2 world wars and a depression and 150 competitors, and came out the other side as the most recognized motorcycle brand in human history. The Harley-Davidson logo is one of the most tattooed images on human skin anywhere in the world today. That is a fact so strange it sounds invented and is not. That sound, that accidental 45-degree throb that William Harley never planned to create, is played on the streets of every continent. Lawyers spent years in court trying to protect it. Not the name, not the logo, the sound itself. And somewhere in a climate-controlled museum in Milwaukee behind glass, lit from below, is the original engine. The one from 1901, smaller than you expect, 2 horsepower, a leather belt. A hill it could not climb. If you go and stand in front of it, you can be there as long as you want. Nobody will rush you. The museum is used to people standing in front of that engine for a long time, not reading the placard, just looking at it. They are trying to understand the same thing you are trying to understand right now. How something this small became something that large. How 2 young men with no money and no connections and no reason to believe it was going to work kept going back to the shed every evening until it did. How the failure to climb a hill in 1901 became 20,000 motorcycles in France in 1917 and became the last American manufacturer standing in 1953 and became a sound that lawyers tried to own and became a logo that people put on their skin for life. The answer is not complicated, but it is not simple either. It is this. William Harley and Arthur Davidson never tried to build the most impressive machine. They tried to build the most honest one. A machine that did exactly what it promised to do, every time, without drama, without failure, without asking anything from the rider except that he get on and go. And when that machine accidentally developed a voice, they were wise enough to leave it alone. The world does not always reward the loudest or the fastest or the best funded. Sometimes it rewards the one that just keeps going back to the shed. Now, I promised you the part that changes everything, the part that almost undid it all. And here it is. Everything I have told you today, every year of survival, every war contract, every competitor that fell, every decade of being the last one standing, all of it came within a single business deal of being erased. Not by a competitor, not by a war, by a bowling company. In 1969, the founding families sold Harley-Davidson to a conglomerate called AMF, American Machine and Foundry, a company that made bowling equipment and golf carts and recreational vehicles and had absolutely no understanding of what it meant to build a Harley-Davidson. What AMF understood was production numbers, volume, output, and what they did with Harley-Davidson in the 1970s, in the name of growth, in the name of efficiency, came so close to killing the brand permanently that the men who survived those years still talk about it like a war. That story is next week. And I am not saying that to tease you. I am saying it because what happened to Harley-Davidson in the 1970s is the other half of this story. The part where everything William Harley and Arthur Davidson built gets handed to people who do not understand what it is, and what the people who did understand it had to do to get it back. It involves a group of employees who bought the company back from AMF with money they did not have, a deadline they almost missed, a press conference that nobody expected to happen, And a decision made in a boardroom in 1981 that is the reason Harley-Davidson still exists today. The shed is still gone. The dirt alley is still a street in Milwaukee. But what came out of that shed is still running, 120 years later, still making that sound. Come back for the rest of it.